I found my destiny the very first time I ever went to the movies. The movie was called Those Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines, and even as an 8-year-old, sitting in the upper balcony of the Nautilus Theater in Lido Beach, I knew that I was destined to fly. In those days, there was a seaplane port at the edge of Barnum Island, and I started going there every day after school as long as the weather was good. I'd sit on the pier, I'd watch butterflies, I'd watch the seaplanes take off and land, I'd watch the seagulls soaring over Reynolds Channel, and I'd think how wonderful it would be to be flying, to be part of the wind, part of the air. I started having a recurring dream. I had recently gotten my first bicycle, well, the first one I didn't have to share with my brother. And in my dream, I wheeled the bike out of our shed and found that it had grown wings. And not just any wings, but big, perfect white ones, like the picture of Pegasus in the book of Greek myths for children. At first I was hesitant on Pegasus' bike, just riding around Carolina Avenue and the neighboring blocks, but soon I soared all over town. I knew that if you kept going east, you reached Europe, and so I assumed that the islands I could see across Rec Lead were England and France. And before long, my nightly dream flights took me over the Eiffel Tower and Big Ben, landing in our backyard just in time to wheel Pegasus' bike back into the shed and wake up to go to school. But when I came home from school and I took my bike out, it didn't have even the faintest buds of wings, never mind big perfect white ones like Pegasus. It was during that summer, though, that I really figured out flying. See, I was taking swimming lessons, and I was reading a lot of comic books. And I noticed that when Superman flew, it was just like the dead man's float. And so I decided that flying must be like swimming, only you did it in the air instead of the water. I waited for a windy day to test my theory. I went up to the top of Carolina Avenue, ran as fast as I could, leapt into the air, and got off just a few strokes before falling. Fortunately, my instincts were intact, and I put my feet down as soon as I felt myself falling, so I wasn't injured. I tried again, but still, I only got off a few strokes before falling. Well, you know, the crawl wasn't my best stroke, so I tried again with the breaststroke, but was no more successful. And then, of course, I had it. The butterfly, of course. But I was no better at the butterfly than the crawl, and that didn't work either. I thought a little harder. Maybe I could try starting a little higher up where there would be less gravity. So I went around the block to Alabama Avenue where there was a fence you could climb that would put you on the top of Mr. Schaefer's roofs, the garage of Mr. Schaefer's house. And I stood on the roof of the garage, and I just ran in place before leaping out. But again, I only went a few feet forward, but about 8 feet down. I landed on my hands and knees in the soft grass of Crazy Sally's house, and only my pride was injured, but I did give up trying to fly for a long time after that. Over the next 20 years, all of my flying was limited to seats in commercial airplanes. But one day when I was about 30, I was sitting around with some friends and we were talking about childhood dreams and how they never really die. And I talked about my desire to fly. And one of them just said, well, why don't you take flying lessons? This had never occurred to me. I did a little bit of research and decided that flying a helicopter would be most like what I wanted to experience. And I found a place that did introductory flying lessons. For a very low fee, you got a 2-hour ground school and a 45-minute flight. Well, I went to the ground school and I knew it was what I was meant to be doing. Everything made perfect sense. I was a little intimidated when the instructor talked about how much money it costs and how many lessons you need to get your license. But this was my destiny. I knew I was going to be a natural, and I was going to get my license faster than anybody ever had. And then a couple of weeks later, it was time for my actual flight. Of course, my colleagues spent the whole day talking about great helicopter crashes that they had heard of. I confidently drove down to the Torrance Municipal Airport. Torrance, for those of you who don't know, is the Southern California equivalent of New Jersey. And I parked my car, and then suddenly something else started flying. It wasn't butterflies in my stomach, it was vampire bats. Because I realized I was about to brave some of the most crowded airspace in the world, with the only thing between me and certain death being a guy wearing board shorts and sun-bleached hair with a surfer accent who called himself Redondo Donnie and supported his surfing habit by doing traffic reports and teaching introductory flying lessons. Well, still, this was my destiny, and so I went through with it, and I strapped myself into the helicopter with Redondo Donnie sitting next to me. He took off, and we flew out over the ocean, and then he told me to take the controls and fly straight. Well, how hard could it be flying straight, right? Well, there's wind, and there's gusts, and you just don't go straight naturally. And it was next to impossible. I would turn to the right, I would turn to the left. I couldn't get the helicopter going in a straight line. After a while, he said, okay, I'm going to take us down and you're going to try to hover. Well, this meant staying in the same place. Why, that had to be even easier, right? Well, the helicopter rotor turns one way, so you have to keep adjusting the rudders the other way. I could not get the helicopter to stay in one place. It just turned to the right, turned too much to the left. Finally, he said, here, let me show you. And in seconds, we were completely still. At that moment, I realized Redondo Donnie was a god, and I was a mere mortal. It had given me something to think about as we came back to the airport, and I got in my car and I drove home. I lived at the time by Venice Beach, and when I got home, I went and I walked out to the beach, and I sat down in the sand. I looked to the north, and there were a few butterflies going by. I looked to the south, and I watched the planes taking off and landing at LAX, and I watched the seagulls soaring over the Pacific. I sat back in the sand, and I felt myself become part of the earth, part of the ground. Thank you.